know that the author of Matthew's Gospel changes pronouns in order to convince his audience that Jesus was...
Did you know that I normally don't stitch people, but for the rhetorical purposes of my channel, which is countering anti-missionaries, I feel that I must, and it's not to start a fight with you, but to posit information to you that you may not have heard. Okay, so I've heard your stance on the alma, but I want to tell you something. I don't know if you know this, but all 7 times that the alma is used, it is used of a virgin, and it cannot be shown that she's not a virgin. Yes, even the one in Proverbs. And I can show that, but I already have numerous videos on it if you check my channel, Biblical Apologetics on YouTube. So now that we know that, why did the author choose the word alma? Well, alma tells us 5 things. 1, she's of marriageable age. She's young. She has never been married. She has never had kids and is a virgin. Let me explain why betula or betula is not a good word to use in Isaiah 7. Well, for one, it doesn't tell you the age. It just tells you the sexual status of a woman. In other words, she has never had the thing that we're not allowed to say here on TikTok. And so therefore you can have an 80-year-old virgin, but it doesn't tell you that she's young enough to be married and even bear children. So alma is a much better word to use. So you mentioned it's Isaiah's wife, which by the way, I don't know if you know, Jews are confused. Is it Hezekiah or is it Isaiah's wife that has Mahar Shalal Hashbahaz, and we can't figure out which child it is, which is why you have Jewish people on both sides of the fence, which ought to tell you that it's rather ambiguous in and of itself. Since you never see a woman called alma after she's had kids, that would ixnay Isaiah's wife, who's already had Shear Yeshuv, and or unless you're going to take the stance that Isaiah had 2 wives and then you're reading into the text, which some Jews have posited that and said, well, he has 2 wives and therefore the second wife is the one that has Maher Shalal Hashbahaz. That's a problem though, because it's reading into the text something that's not there.
Yeah, sorry about the typo. It was supposed to say the Radak, not Rashi. I guess my autocorrect or my brain just wrote Rashi, but nonetheless, it's the Radak. The Radak thinks the Targumim, Jonathan, is claiming that the Isaiah son in chapter 7 isn't real, but rather a concept of his disciples that he brings with him. I don't know that I would agree with what the Radak is saying here with regards to how Targum Jonathan is interpreting, but nonetheless, this is the source. So I wanted to show you it zoomed in and then the Targumim. It says in the underline, it says, because Jonathan, or for Jonathan, Shear Yeshuv, that's the name of the child, Lo, it says was Lo, like not Lo, the son of Isaiah. It says for he was not the son of Isaiah. And here's the Targumim that the Radak is quoting from, saying that it's not a real person there.
So now let's check out the changing of the pronouns, which it's not really a problem, but I know that a lot of anti-missionaries claim it's a problem, even though it's not really a problem, because then they'd have to hold themselves to the same standards that they hold us to, which they're not doing, but let's check it out anyways. Hine ha'alma ha'ra ve'yoledet ben, and then here's the problem, right? And we'll call his name Emmanuel. Doesn't really say who or what, no pronouns, just will call. Septuagint and thou shall call, which could be a they, you know, thou shall. Who is it talking to? JPS Tanakh and shall call his name Emmanuel. So the point that I'm getting at is it's not really a change if Matthew is simply picking up on the fact that someone, i.e. they, will call his name Emmanuel.
So here is a commenter who actually understood what it was that I was saying, but didn't make the connection to the video. Ergo, since the Hebrew doesn't require a pronoun, Matthew simply points out that his mother, because the angel came to her, calls him this.
Well, so you might be wondering, how is it messianic since Isaiah lived 700 years before Yeshua? Well, the point is God wants you to know through the prophet Isaiah that the promise of the Mashiach, that is the Messiah to come, still stands, even though they're in the midst of a civil war, and God promised no one but Judah would sit on that throne. Genesis 49:10, Numbers 24:17, Psalm 60, ultimately promising the very thing that he said it would come, which is by 700 years from now, it still stands. That's the promise of Messiah.
As many of you know, I have since found this book, which has commentary in it on Isaiah 7. This was published in 2019, which is eerily similar to my commentary, thus showing that I'm not just taking a verse out of context. I'm actually putting it right within its context. But then he went on to make another video. Let's look.
The author of Matthew's Gospel changes pronouns in order to convince his audience that Jesus was...
Did you know that I normally don't stitch people, but for the rhetorical purposes of my channel, which is countering anti-missionaries, I feel that I must, and it's not to start a fight with you, but to posit information to you that you may not have heard.
All right, let's see it. Sorry, Dan, couldn't resist.
I don't know if you know this, but all 7 times that the alma is used, it is used of a virgin, and it cannot be shown that she's not a virgin.
So first, not only is that an argument from silence, it's not true. Exhibit A, Proverbs 30, verse 19. The way of a man with a alma. This is the way of an adulterous woman who eats and wipes her mouth and says, I have done no wrong. Of course, you'll probably disagree with that interpretation because as an apologist, you have to. But it's not even true of the verse in Isaiah itself. After the prophecy of the virgin giving birth. So I approached the prophetess, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. Now that word approached means they got to know each other, biblically.
Yes, I'm aware Isaiah made love to his wife. I never said otherwise. In fact, I emphatically say that the child in Isaiah 7 is not the child in Isaiah 8. That's something that you didn't address. But you also didn't really deal with my Proverbs 30 mention, as you can see in my comment here under your video. But I will certainly get to it in this video, showing without a shadow of a doubt that the adulterous woman cannot be the Alma in verse 19. I will address it here.
That's why after the encounter, she conceived and then gave birth. This wording.
Yeah, but see, that's not my argument. As I state here, Isaiah's wife, who already had a son, is not the same son of Isaiah 7:14.
This wording is used a few other places, including Genesis 38, where Judah sleeps with his daughter-in-law, Tamar. Judah saw her and thought she was a harlot, so he said, let me come into you. And she conceived by him. Now you might say that was a different child because he had a different name. I'll get to that. But there's another problem with the word Alma. Obviously, that's the feminine form of the word. The masculine form of the word is Elim. By the way, I'm sure I'm pronouncing these words wrong. I took Greek instead of Hebrew in college. 1 Samuel 17, the king said, inquire whose son the youth is. That's the word Elim, and it's referring to a son. 1 Samuel 20, there it is again, except it's translated to lad this time. So why is the feminine form translated to virgin, but not the male form?
Yes, the Elim argument, used twice in the Hebrew Bible, and this is one that the, quote, Persian Jew, as he calls himself, tried to use with me, which didn't go over very well, but nonetheless, I refute that in the next video, but you're free to read the comment here.
Let me explain why Betula or Betula is not a good word to use in Isaiah 7. Well, for one, it doesn't tell you the age, it just tells you the sexual status of a woman.
So why couldn't the author have said young virgin, like it does in Joel chapter 1? Like a virgin of her youth.
Wait a minute. Did you just make an argument from silence, even though you said I couldn't do that, even though I wasn't actually doing it? I'll forget about it. But regardless, Psalm 148, here is a Jewish translation. Yes, I just copied it out because I don't want any beef with copyright issues, even though technically it's fair use. Nonetheless, notice here that they chose to write young maidens rather than young virgins. Isn't that ironic that they acknowledge that there's a semantic range of the words that implies specifically what the context of the passage is talking about? And here's the source for those of you who have beef. Take it up with this rabbi, not myself. Therefore, one would not need to say young because the word alma, which we're arguing over, already has that connotation built in. But I digress. And while I will get into Joel, verse 8, I want you to note here that the woman who is weeping, she's weeping for the husband that she married when she was young and a virgin. It doesn't imply her current age. That's the difference.
Moving right along.
So you mentioned it's Isaiah's wife, which, by the way, I don't know if you know, Jews are confused. Is it Hezekiah or is it Isaiah's wife that has Mahar Shalal Hashbahaz?
So child is given two names to signify the fulfillment of two prophecies that will happen during his life. One to be called by his mother and one to be called by his father. But it is the same child. She will call him Emmanuel, for before the boy will know enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose two kings you dread will be forsaken. Then the Lord...
So I know I've already said this, but you do know that not all translations say she. Like even JPS Tanakh doesn't say she. I mean, I think we've already established that the she is there as an apologetic with regards to the reason why CaptainDadPool has even made the video, because he's implying that Matthew distorted what was originally in the Hebrew text, when in the Hebrew text originally, there is no pronoun she. You could say she, you could say he, but the apologetic is the child has two names, one from his mother being the she, and one from his father. So they really want to focus on the fact that they believe that the New Testament distorted it, even though they're not telling you about the syntax of the Hebrew there, which is why I made the video.
Then the Lord said to me, name him Mahar Shalal Hashbaz, which means quicken the spoil, hasten the booty. For before the boy knows how to cry out, my father and my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoils of Samaria will be carried away.
So, as I've stated many times, these two children are not the same children. I know at first glance it may appear like they are because it says "for before the boy knows" in chapter 7, and then it also says "for before the boy knows" in chapter 8, speaking of Isaiah's son. What you need to know is Isaiah 7 is speaking to the house of David, in particular the king line, whereas Isaiah is not of the king line. This is why in Isaiah 8, you see it talking about the land of the king. It will flow over the breadth of your land, spreading streams, etc., your entire land, O Emmanuel. So if this child, whom is called Emmanuel, as the king, is Isaiah's son, then we have a problem, because none of Isaiah's sons would have been in the line of David for which the promise in chapter 7, verse 14 speaks. And this is why some Jews have posited, because of the Davidic link, it's got to be Hezekiah. But as Rashi says, Hezekiah was already born at the time of this. And that is why I said Jews are confused. They don't know who it's about. So if it's not Isaiah, because he's not of the king line, but it speaks of someone who is in the king line, but it couldn't be Hezekiah because he was already born at the time that this was given, then it must be a future Davidic king that is so preserved that it protects the lineage. Mashiach.
Isaiah was the prophet of the southern kingdom, which God preserved, as opposed to the northern kingdom, which God let fall. The prophet of the northern kingdom was Hosea. God told him to give his kids names that meant "not pitied" and "not my children." Again, that was the purpose of these names, to signify what was going to happen in their lifetime, not what was going to happen 700 years later. There is a lot more I could say on this topic, but alas, I'm out of time. But good luck on that book you're writing.
Thanks. But let's be honest, you had the same amount of time that I did, and I was able to effectively present my point and pre-refute yours, but watch me cram an hour into 3 minutes.
CaptainDadPool, I know you only got 3 minutes, so do I, but I didn't expect you to cut out the unique parts of my apologetic, i.e. Genesis 49:10, showing that Isaiah 7:14 is about the Messiah, 700 years to come, ultimately, because they're about to go into exile, and that Genesis 49:10 promise still stands. I also didn't expect you to cut out the fact that Isaiah can't have make love to his wife in chapter 8, and it be the Alma in chapter 7, because she's already had Shiar Yeshuv, and Almas never have kids already. So that's a point that I brought up and put in the part up there. I don't think it was addressed. So I also didn't expect you to cut out the other part of my apologetic where I pre-refuted you in my original video regarding Proverbs 30, verse 19 and 20, because that's a famous one everybody uses. In fact, they agree with all the others. Isaiah 7, you can't use that one because that's the one in question, which you did, by the way. And Proverbs 30, 19 and 20. But here's the thing. I've already refuted that, and I put it up in the text, but you cut that out. So that's kind of important for your viewers. So I'll briefly go over that for your people in case you cut it out again. But essentially, guys, there are 3 things that are too wonderful for that he doesn't understand. And if you do the count, the last count is the Alma. Now, some people have interpreted to bring verse 20 up with verse 19, but, well, I don't interpret it that way. And as he rightly said, I'm an apologist, so you're going to interpret it that way. Well, I'm going to say the same thing to you because I can do it as well. You're an atheist, so I expect you to interpret it opposite. See, I can do it too.
Woo-wee, that Southern auctioneer style version of me came out really thick in that video, but I want you to focus on this part. The adulterous woman, meaning a woman who's already married, cannot be the Alma because we've already established that an Alma is not married or had kids. But back to the auctioneer version of myself.
So far, we have no concrete proof that the word Alma cannot denote virginity. I never said it exclusively denotes virginity, but I did say it can denote virginity. I think that was another part you cut out. But this is why I said, this is why Jerome said, let them, i.e. the Jews, at least show me where the word is applied to married women as well, and I will confess my ignorance.
And that's how we know the Proverbs adulterous woman is not an Alma, because an adulterous woman is married.
I'll show you that.
Right there, pause to read.
So the only points I really didn't refute, and they're kind of silly to be honest with you, which is why I never mentioned them, is the Elim, which is only used twice in the Hebrew Bible, which is less than the Alma, which is used 7 times in the Hebrew Bible, and you still can't prove that Alma is someone who's not a virgin. You certainly can't prove that David, who is an Elim, is definitely not also a virgin, since he was pretty young. But there's argument about what the age he was when he went to war. I mean, we can talk about that.
All right, so now we're going to turn our attention to the 2 times of King David that the word Elim is used, and we can't show that he's not a virgin. What do I mean? I mean that his first wife, Michal, which is the daughter of Saul, King Saul, we see that there's this triangle of love that's happening here. So In verse 12, we see that David is gaining favor because the Lord is with him. We see then that Saul schemes to give his daughter over because she loved David. And so he says, okay, this is what I want. I want the bride price. And we know that David does double that. So now we have the issue that's happening. That's the setup for this, which is that Saul is starting to see that David is more favored with the Lord than Saul himself. So what happens next is the setup. So David does what he is required to do, does double it. Saul gets jealous. Then he has to, David that is, flee for his life. And then, of course, Saul gives away his daughter to Palti. And this is why this becomes interesting, because David later asks for his wife, Michal, back. They had not yet consummated the marriage. Now, I'm not the only one that believes this. There, obviously, as you see on screen, rabbinic commentary that also says that Palti embedded, this is completely rabbinic, but that he embedded a sword in the bed between him and her and said, anyone who engages in this matter, and you can see on screen what he's talking about going into her, should be stabbed by this sword. Right? And this is rabbinic commentary. This is not Courtney's commentary. You can see in the text that they never had a chance to actually consummate the marriage. Thereby, the 2 times in 1st and 2nd Samuel that David is called an Elim would be that he is still a virgin. He had yet to consummate the marriage with Michal. He says, okay, bride price. He then has to flee. He then later in 2 Samuel asks for his wife back, but then she would be forbidden if she had slept with Palti, which, by the way, is the entire point of the commentary, to show whether or not David was forbidden to take Michal back. And of course, they established no, he wasn't, because she had not consummated the marriage with Palti. Notice they bring out the nuances of his name in different locations, which is interesting. I find that very interesting. And when Paul does stuff like this, he's called a heretic. But when they do it, it's fine. But nonetheless, thereby showing Elim, i.e. David, is a virgin. So both the feminine, that is Alma, and the masculine, Elim, show and denote that the person has yet to consummate any marriage, thereby showing their virginity is still intact. But, don't take my word for it. Study it out for yourself. Now, let's continue.
So now we're going to talk about Joel 1 verse 8, which is another one I didn't bring out because I thought we were talking about what words mean in the Bible. If you look at what words mean in the Bible, and I noticed you didn't give it really an expository response on that, but if you notice the Betula, right? She also is stated there to call her husband Baal. I don't know if you know this. I'm sure you do, though. Baal is never used of someone who is in just a courtship or betrothal stage. So I thought that was already well noted.
So this shows us that Baal is used of a husband who's consummated a marriage, thereby showing that the woman in Joel 1 is weeping for the man who took her virginity the first time she got married.
So now we're going to talk about, there's actually 3 prophecies in Isaiah 7, short, medium, and long. So short, 4 years, medium, 65 years. That's the carrying away into exile, which ultimately starts in Isaiah 7, ends in 2 Kings 18, at the very place it started, on the road to the Launderman's Field, the aqueduct. And then finally, verse 14, which again takes us back to Genesis 49:10 promise, showing that ultimately, even though they're going into exile, which is the unique part of my apologetic, the promise of the Mashiach still stands. So I'd like you to deal with that. Thank you. Shalom. And also, everybody note, it's all in good fun.
All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. It was a fun little one to edit and put together. But a recap really quickly. So Isaiah 7 is speaking to the line of David, of kings, right? This is why when you see things like speak to the house of Aaron, it's speaking to the priest. Speak to the house of David, it's speaking to the king line. And then if it says something like speak to Judah, it's speaking just to the southern tribe or those in which the southern house controls. And then other things like that. So it's important to know that whenever you're coming into this. So Isaiah 7 is speaking to the king line, which sets up the context, right? Isaiah 7:14 is a different child than chapter 8:3. I know it's similar, but again, if you know that Isaiah's son in chapter 8 is not of the king line, then that can help you understand what's going on. Now, Matthew has no issue with the pronouns. The pronouns are fine in the Hebrew. In fact, Matthew did a very good job at just telling you, since, Gabriel came to her, then she's going to call. And then finally, the Elim and the Alma. Clearly, David had not consummated the marriage yet, and that means that Elim and Alma denote virginity. And I would like to say that I think that's a pretty clear case. I mean, you just can't get around the way that the Hebrew words are used. So guys, I hope the video is a blessing. Please, please, please study and feel free to take notes. Drop the comments in the comment section if you don't understand, and I'll do my best to get back to you. And shalom.